This is the Depth Mystic Community Podcast, episode 23, an Alpha and Omega Unspecial. With me, as always, is our guest, Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan. How are you this week? Hi, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm pretty good. It's kind of cold, and it's winter, and it's Christmas. I was thinking, were we going to do a Christmas special? Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if the Depth Mystic community is so normal as to do a Christmas special. I mean, I too am feeling the darkness and the coldness and the sort of passive yin inactivity of the season, of the weather and the mood. And I too am feeling that. But I don't know if I think of the Depth Mystic Community Podcast as normal enough to have a Christmas special or not. So, are we even acknowledging that it's Christmas? I mean, how normal are we? Well, I think both sides have a point. But maybe we should just have the kind of conversation we would have had anyway. Yeah, okay, because I do like to keep it as organic as possible. And insofar as the primary subject matter of depth mysticism doesn't need to care about the weather or the season, then we can focus on that primary subject matter without making a seasonal episode. Today, I wanted to come back to a topic I've covered before, which is summarized in the term Alpha and Omega. The Alpha and Omega. And it really does characterize our situation. It is kind of a paradigm that we need to bear in mind going forward. Maybe you can explain further what you think I mean when I'm bringing up the subject Alpha and Omega. I call myself a Jungian depth mystic. I've given myself a name. And therein lies precisely the issue. Because I looked around in society and I couldn't find enough people who were precisely like me to be able to identify and pursue an existing role or title, such as, for example, Jungian analyst. Jungian analyst might hypothetically have been the role in society that I would pursue if I had believed in that role sufficiently. But the truth is, the Jungian community, although on the one hand they like to think of themselves as bold and open-minded with regard to psychology, on the other hand, they do have barriers to entry, credentialed walls that made it impossible for somebody like me, who's basically an outsider to society at this point, to pursue that track. And it's not like I would have been super proud to say I'm a Jungian analyst. It's just that it was one of the tracks that I might have pursued. But as it stands, I decided it's easier for me to call myself a Jungian mystic or a depth mystic because that is more accurate. But the downside is that I had to make up the term myself. I can start to see where you might be headed with this because making up a term is like you're acknowledging you have a kind of authority and status. Maybe you're giving it to yourself, but it nonetheless is your way of saying that you have an authoritative consciousness. Right, and this is what I would call an alpha consciousness. It's basically a consciousness that believes that it has no need to submit to any other existing more authoritative or greater consciousness in the world when it comes to the most decisive questions. It's not that I don't respect other people's specialties. It's just like, if you're a philosopher, then you want your own mind to be good enough to stand as the final judge on what you think is true philosophically. And that's how I see myself. I see my experiences and my mind as having an alpha status, where I just don't believe anybody else is smarter than me with regard to reality. I won't just pretend that I'm going to bow down to somebody else's worldview. So I see myself as an alpha. Right. And so in creating a name for yourself, you're saying you deserve to be thought of as an authority. And at the same time, because you had to create the name for yourself, you are an omega in society. The kind of authority you think of yourself as does not exist in any acknowledged way. Right. And so the whole picture is presented. On the one hand, I think of myself as a true resource, philosophical, spiritual, with regard to the most important questions that people have. But on the other hand, I'm a lone wolf, somebody who doesn't even want to join a lot of other entities precisely because they don't carry alpha status. And so as an omega in society, I guess it's a big concern how you might participate, whether it has to do with just making money or serving a higher cause or just serving people. Whether you're doing it for yourself or doing it for society, the question that you as an omega in society would have to ask is, who do you want to be a part of? What group do you even want to be a part of? Right, so that's why we like the term alpha and omega, because we're in that situation. We're not going to renounce our right to stand as the authority, not just in our own lives, but as a philosophical authority on reality. But at the same time, we don't even know what part of society we want to belong to. Okay, and now there's a couple different dimensions for not wanting to belong to parts of society. Maybe you could talk about those dimensions. Well, if by dimensions you mean positions of strength, one could be pessimistic about joining society basically because one is actually harboring secret doubts about one's abilities to perform in society. One is pretending that society is difficult or impossible to join, largely as a defense mechanism against their own fears that if they did try to join society, they wouldn't be good enough, or at least the people they were trying to join would deem them to be not good enough. So you could say that you have no place in society out of weakness. And I don't want to say that I'm not doing that. I don't want to say categorically that there's no part of me that is standing out society and sort of refusing to participate in it because some part of me is scared that if I actually do, then I will be rejected. That's a normal fear, and it's perfectly appropriate for someone who hasn't found a way into society. So I don't want to pretend that I'm totally immune from that position of weakness. But on the other side, I can attest to a genuine feeling of alienation from the people I might otherwise want to join. For example, if I had to become my own authority, then I was always to some extent looking down on people, at least in some way. So there's a persistent question of who is worth investing energy into such that I could be part of a greater society. Well, we have a podcast here. We're making a podcast, and that is one way to join society. Right, but it's only a podcast. And I think that's why we're revisiting this issue today of the question of alpha and omega. Admittedly, it is possible for a podcast just through word of mouth to become so popular that it becomes an institution with a vigorous community that you can have in society. We could imagine the community surrounding the Depth Mystic podcast becoming the vehicle by which we entered into society. But we're not doing a very good job of marketing ourselves if that's our goal. And we might not even be making the kind of podcast that could fulfill that goal even if we had great marketing. And we might not be covering the kind of subject matter that could even conceivably create such a community. We're talking about how you can be an omega in society. But what part of society are you even trying to join? That's arguably the main theme of the Christian religion, actually, is that Jesus, he entered into society as an omega personality. And yet the Christian religion elevated him above all of the emperors who were the alphas of their society. And so the Christian religion is highlighting a huge contrast between the person they claim is the alpha and the people who would be considered alphas by any traditional standard. That's true. I mean, you can point that out about Christianity, and maybe Christianity has some kind of special insight into that dynamic, but as someone who's actually living this process, I can't say that Christians as such have been all that much of a help to our cause, either in trying to establish our authority as alphas or just helping us find a community any more than any other group of people. It all comes back to this kind of consciousness that I discovered as a 19-year-old that took me over. It lit a fire within me that grew to a strength. It activated a religious conversion. And ever since then, I've had this religion that I belong to, but that doesn't really have a big enough community of its own. And for me, it is the true religion. But other people would have to adhere to that philosophy. They'd have to get it and believe it. And as it stands, here we are. We have a podcast. This podcast is devoted to this religion, basically. And that being said, I don't know where to go from here. We're back at the Alpha and Omega. On the one hand, we're trying to speak with the authority of true religion. And on the other hand, we're just a couple lone guys making a podcast. So we're back at Alpha and Omega. And the obvious question is, what next? What will be next? Find out on the next episode.